Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this opportunity to discuss pesticides in relation to wildlife, particularly birds, because birds are my field of competence. I heartily endorse your attempts to have the problem of persistent pesticides reviewed objectively. A year ago, in March, I was scheduled to lecture in Norfolk, Virginia. At dinner before the lecture, I was informed that the city was to be sprayed with deodorant. 300 acres were to be sprayed because the entomologists had discovered the presence of fringe beetles. Although there was some public protest, the edict had been issued, the town would be sprayed. In my opening remarks that evening, I said it was good to return to Virginia. It was good to hear mockingbirds again. Then I added, but you probably won't have them next week. A hush fell over the audience as I warned them that Rachel Carson's Silent Spring was no fantasy. It could happen in Norfolk. I learned later that 236 dead birds were picked up immediately after the spraying and more later, making a total of 309 birds that actually were affected because dying birds try to hide. If we were to go so far as to apply the Norfolk yardstick to the 100 or 150 million acres of American soil that are sprayed every year, we might assume that more than 100 million birds are killed yearly.
Since World War II, and particularly during the last 10 years, dechlorinated hydrocarbons have been widely promoted like wonder drugs as a panacea for all conceivable insect ills and plant diseases. Dr. George Wallace, professor of zoology at Michigan State University, in describing the potential effect of indiscriminate spraying on bird life, went so far as to call it worse than deforestation, worse than market gunning, worse than drainage, drought, or oil pollution. If the pest eradication programs are carried out as now projected, we shall have been witness within a single decade to a greater extermination of animal life than in all the previous years of man's history. The residual effects of spraying with DDT are much more subtle and sinister than immediate results of spraying. Earthworms ingesting leaf mold months after elms have been sprayed with DDT against Dutch elm disease accumulate the poisons. 10 such infected worms may be enough to kill a robin, but the mass dying may not occur until the spring after the spraying. Hydrocarbon pesticides murder differently because they mostly have a long life without chemical breakdown and accumulate in soil and water and in the bodies of all members of the animal pyramid. One of the classic cases of this buildup occurred at Clear Lake in California. DDT was applied with several treatments within 8 years in very dilute quantities to kill gnats. It did. It was almost eaten and concentrated 250 times by the water plankton, the tiny invertebrate animals. It was found in 500 times concentration in the small fishes that ate the plankton. It killed most of the western grebes that ate the fishes, nearly 1,000 pairs, and they died with an 80,000 times concentration. Those birds at the top of the pyramid are particularly vulnerable, for they take poison biologically concentrated by their prey, and their prey's prey.
I am most immediately concerned about those species that are at the end of long food chains, particularly fish-eating birds. A lifetime of experience and observation on birds in many parts of the world and every state of the Union have convinced me that these species are in the greatest danger and some may face eventual extinction. It is unforgivable when a species, the end product of millions of years of evolution, disappears in our generation.
The whole continent has poisons in its veins and arteries. Let me tell you about the Connecticut River where I live, a beautiful river, and it is dying. I moved to Old Lyme, Connecticut largely because of the colony of ospreys around the mouth of the river. There was even a nest on our property. I investigated the concentration of nests on the Great Island at about the time there should have been full-grown young. Most of the nests were empty. The next year was also a failure. Some of the birds sat on unhatched eggs for 60 and 70 days. An osprey's egg should hatch in 32 days. Finally, several eggs were analyzed. They contained significant amounts of DDT, DDE, and derivatives of DDT. 30 samples of fish taken from the nests all contained these poisons. We could come to only one conclusion.
The colony had been shrinking. Here are some of the statistics. In 1954, there were approximately 150 nests. In 1960, there were 71. In 1963, 24. This year, 15. They are dropping at the rate of more than 30% yearly. Projecting the decline, we should see our last nest on the Connecticut in 1970 or 1971. There is not much spraying in Old Lyme, but half a dozen towns upriver spray. There is undoubtedly air drift and runoff. You cannot confine these poisons as long as wind blows and water flows or fishes swim. Traces of poisons ingested by the little fish upriver make them easier prey for the larger fish. Numbers of affected fingerlings compound their poisons in their predators, and it is the large fish that is wobbly, swimming near the surface, that is most likely to be caught by the osprey, which transfers the accumulated poisons to its own tissue. Natural selection has become unnatural selection.
Ospreys in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and on the coast of New Jersey are also dropping fast, apparently for the same reasons. We know that the bald eagle, our national bird, is in serious trouble along the Atlantic coast. In Scotland, the golden eagle is also in trouble. In the British Isles and on the continent of Europe, the sparrowhawk has almost disappeared, and nearly every species of bird of prey is down in numbers. The peregrine falcon, the finest and fastest bird that flies, has disappeared from the whole of the northeastern states. The same thing has happened in Britain. So it is evident that this is a world problem wherever pesticides are used. But it is a faster process here because of our usual American efficiency. We even poison our environment faster.
We are in a sad way if we always think in terms of profit, regardless of general good. We must think seriously about these things and not allow the tyranny of special interests to ruin America. The pest problem is largely man-made, the result of monoculture and the futile expectation that we can go on squeezing nature for more and more production. What is most needed is to consider chemicals only one among many approaches to insect control.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I wish to conclude by offering some recommendations. First, it is my opinion that aldrin, endrin, dieldrin, and all compounds of all chlorinated hydrocarbon complex be banned. Permits to manufacture them should be withdrawn. It is impossible to keep these poisons from contaminating our entire environment so long as winds blow, waters flow, and fishes swim.
In one of her statements to a committee of Congress about a year ago, the late Rachel Carson urged the creation by law of a federal board of control that would have authority to regulate the distribution and use of chemical pesticides. I endorsed Ms. Carson's proposal. Someone must have the veto power when a veto is necessary to prevent regressive pollution of the environment.
We hate to lose the last of the ospreys. That is quite possible, you know. It is pretty sad.
I just could not live without birds, frankly. I would hate to live in a lifeless world.